everybody. Welcome to episode 16 of Are We There Yet? This episode is The Birds and the Bees. I'm your host, Susan Ruth.
And I'm your host, Mara Adelman. And today we have with us the other Mara Adelman, Dr. Mara Adelman. And we will introduce her in a minute. So today we are three humans who are going to have the real conversations and raise all the questions that we all have about where the there is when it comes to dating, relationships, and sex.
Yay.
So Dr. Mara Adelman, we met serendipitously in Napa. I had heard a lot about there being another Mara Adelman in Napa. Everything from being at the vet and they tried to hand me the wrong dog's medicine to some weird banking stuff at one point. And somebody's like, oh, there's this artist, Mara Adelman. And then one day I'm at the clinic and somebody says, hey, the other Mara Adelman wants to meet you. And so I was like, oh, I go running in. She's getting acupuncture done. 5 minutes, we were like, we both have twin sisters. Mine is named Layla. Hers is named Gila. We've all since met. It was really cool. I think both of our families are from Poland. Correct me if I get any of this wrong, Mara. And then we've hung out a couple times and walked the dogs. And I don't live in Napa anymore, but I thought she would be a perfect person to do this because she has a PhD in communications, worked for years at Seattle University, a lot of things around sexual communication, which you can tell us more about in a minute, Miss Mara, Dr. Mara. And my favorite thing that I read about you, which was super cool, is that you guys at Seattle University put together a lecture series with like 31 different talks: sex trafficking, abstinence versus sex education, body image, self-esteem and sexuality. And the funniest part was she said at the end that the students didn't want to ever leave the talks when normally they go running out of there when class was over. So that's super cool. And then later in life, in retirement, she has given me fabulous Dia de los Muertos earrings to bring to my clinic. I'm sure she made the earrings she's wearing. And I get texts about once a month still. Hey, is that your art? And it'll be the library card that won the contest. It's these two little kids sitting together, reading books, gorgeous. I get constantly from people, is this you teaching this course? I said, no, it's the first Mara Adelman doing it all.
Well, Dr. Adelman, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
How did you get started in your path of teaching people about sex and sex education and wellness?
Well, it was interesting. I was a doctoral student at University of Washington looking for a PhD topic. And I was at the time reading Masters and Johnson's famous book on human sexuality. And their opening paragraph deals with the incompatibility of male and females, timing, sexual arousal, blah, blah, blah. And I immediately thought, well, what's the role of communication in all of this? So then I thought, oh, great, I have a topic. So I went to my advisor. And I was cut short, very short. And I was told I could do that after I got tenure, which was another 10 years away. Because essentially sex talk would have been the kiss of death in academia, you know. And it was the kiss of death until sex became death. And interestingly enough, the advent of AIDS gave us permission to start looking at sexuality in more sociological terms. And I always said people have to die from pleasure before you can study pleasure. And I would say even to this day, there's a certain stigma with sex simply for the act of pleasuring. It's still, even my articles had to be coded as safe sex. So that was one of the discouraging factors. And then the lay public wasn't, no pun intended, wasn't any easier, because usually when I talked about my interest in sex talk, they'd say, oh, you know, you want to study dirty talk, which when you think about it is an interesting category. I mean, think about it, dirty talk. I mean, it's interesting. It's shaded in all the shame versus like feel good talk, passion talk, you know, erotic talk. So I think that cultural category of dirty talk tells us something about the nature of the discourse of intercourse. So anyway, that was, I got started, and it took me about 10 years after I got my PhD, and I was teaching at Northwestern. And a faculty advisor said to me, you can write about sex talk as long as it's coded in safe sex. So that's what I did. So that's how I got started.
Do you feel that that has changed a little bit in the modern time?
Oh, absolutely. I think that shifted somewhat. I think the LGBTQ whatever movement has helped it, opened up questions of sexuality and eroticism. But I think still among the general public, it's somewhat stigmatized. Although interestingly enough, phone sex is the #1 industry, which tells us something about the nature of sex talk itself, you know. I remember once when I had an article accepted by the Journal of Human Sexuality, I called my mother, I was so excited. And she responded and she said, well, you wouldn't want to change your name, would you?
Oh.
I think there's still some taboos around it.
I would agree with that, because when I tell people I'm a physician assistant, but I'm a sexologist on the side, they're like, I often get some like, I see something cross their face, like it's uncomfortable still. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's still not in the public domain. You know,
Everybody does it. Nobody wants to talk about doing it.
well, there's a lot of reasons for that too. And it's really interesting because, you know, Enjoy of Sex and Dr. Ruth's Guide to Sex and stuff. I mean, they pose communication as the summa cum laude, pun intended, between sexual partners. And it's also the root of sexual dissatisfaction. I mean, if you have better communication and blah, blah, blah. But if you look closely at their writing, it's very interesting. They're part of the silencing of sex talk because they keep talking about pay attention to nonverbal cues, intuit your partner's expectations. Even in the book, Human Sexual Response, Masters and Johnson write that words are often secondary to the tone of voice, the facial expression, the look in your eyes. So we're bombarded with messages of rejuvenating sexual play, achieving mutual arousal, sexual bliss. But we forget that sexual activity and sexual gratification is really grounded in interaction, not just action. And so their depiction of, you know, attending to the nonverbal cues is a perpetual silencing that I see happening around sex talk. So
it's interesting when you bring up self-gratification too, the idea that Mara and I have talked about this on the show before, that even in masturbation, there is a disconnect of communication for oneself, and that it becomes all about this area, or usually, and that you kind of dissociate from your genitals and you're just getting off, you're just feeling good. And that there's a lot of disconnect from the body, really being in the body and being grounded in the body.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, here's the interesting thing. When you don't talk, you can treat your partner as an object. Once you speak, you become a subject. You're embodied when you speak. Okay. I have a voice. I mean, it's more than just a metaphor. I have a voice. And once you begin talking, it's hard for people to discount the personhood that they're with. And so I'll talk about this some more, is extremely, extremely powerful. But here's the other issue. When we see in a really, really great review, ethnographic study of sex education in the New York public school systems, Michelle Fine, a noted ethnographer, says there are 4 dominant discourses in sex education: the discourse of violence, rape; the discourse of morality, good girl, bad girl; the discourse of disease, herpes, STDs; and the discourse of desire, which is virtually silence. I mean, it's virtually silence. So early in my research, you can't really put microphones under people's beds and stuff. This is really tough to study. So I decided to start initially interviewing people about sex talk. And that's when I became really shocked at what I discovered. So in one share this one anecdote. I was in a bar and I was asking a very good friend of mine about sex talk, and she launched into this activity, I mean, this long discourse, rather loud and animated, I might add, about her sexual behaviors, toys, positions, and so forth. And I'm trying to be the, objective observer here. And I noticed the bar got a little quiet, as people were listening to her. And finally, I just said, "Hey, Sally, I'm not interested so much in your behavior. What do you actually say to your partner?" And then there was this giggle, and she said, "Oh, Mara, now you're getting too personal." And I almost fell off my chair. I
Wow.
almost fell off my chair. And later on, I was interviewing a gentleman who was obviously very sexually seasoned, I might add, and adventuresome. And he said, "Mara, I think I could talk to you about, my sexual behavior and be pretty candid about it. But I'm sorry, when it comes to the talk, I find that just too intimate." So this became the central thesis of all my work, that the sex talk is more taboo than sexual behaviors themselves. And that's because sex talk is sex. Ultimately, it's the height of sex. So that's
fascinating.
Yeah, the talk is more taboo.
I'm glad you're saying this because it's making me feel more comfortable. At the bottom, we always put a link to a quiz. And the quiz so Susan and I always take the quizzes so we can share with everybody. And it was essentially, how well do you communicate your thoughts during sex? And I did not score very well. I'm a medical provider who sees and talks to people about this stuff. I'm a sexologist who sees and talks to people about this stuff. But my own ability to have the communications, according to this quiz, and actually based on some past experiences, was not very good. So you're making me feel, you just normalize that for me. Thank you.
Well, those constraints that you feel,
yeah,
I mean, there are really good reasons for it. I mean, first of all, one of the things I do in my writing is to identify what I see are constraints in sex talk, because I think if we understand the constraints, okay, we can be a little bit easier on ourselves. But first of all, we have linguistic constraints. I mean, vocabulary itself. I mean, we have nice words, we have dirty words. We know that certain vocabularies, particularly erotic vocabularies, are much more restricted for females than they are for males. Okay. Then we've got, euphemisms. Okay, what do those refer to? And then I remember earlier in my work on trying to identify the language itself, I went to a couple linguists, and one linguist said, "Enough with the sex talk, Mara. All you need to do is elongate your vowels."
Explain.
I get whole audiences to do this, Don't forget your diphthongs, that's the NG. But when you think about it, you've got elongating your vowels. It's really not much of a vocabulary. And then you've got a lot of medical terminology, which actually sounds more like an engineering project. And they're hardly pronounceable. And B, talk about, stopping the erotic slide, I mean, vagina, really?
Although I always go back to, with young people, you should be calling it a vagina, not a coin purse, yes, when you're sexually active, maybe there's more fun words, but teaching young people to call it what it is as a medical provider, I'm like, that's your vagina, that's your penis. If you want to call it a cock and something else fun later when you're older, feel free to do so.
Coin purse, I've never heard that one.
A lot of people call it coin purse. I'd have to remember, but there's so many different words for these things.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that happens with couples, and another article I write about the various discourses, is that they develop their own codes. Couples, I mean, it's part of intimacy. You have special words, you have humor, you have jokes. I would argue that one of the things couples might explore in their sexual relationship is a dominant metaphor that signals that they're sexually interested. I was just thinking of a metaphor because I was afraid you'd ask me, like, for example, and I thought, well, the trains. I mean, are we on an express train, fast train, slow train? Are there a lot of stops, few stops? What kind of train are we on? Are the trains ready to leave? All of these kinds of metaphors that one could explore. what's really interesting is where would we learn this discourse? So I was interested in, where would be possible models. So I studied films. I looked at movies when couples are about to have sex or they're signaling they're interested in sex. And here's what happens in most films. I mean, Hitchcock was famous for this. That they stop, the act stops, and the train goes into the tunnel, the waves break into the shore, there's a sunset. I love the one where the couples are obviously going to have sex, and then they wake up suddenly in the morning having coffee, and she's got his extra long nightshirt on, and the sheets are rumpled. The question we have to ask ourselves is what just got modeled? And what got modeled was you don't talk. No talk is the talk. There is no script. We rarely see a film where there's a really great script. In fact, what's really interesting, the course of this work, and by the way, when I was at Northwestern teaching all this and doing this work, a student once called me a horticulturalist, which I thought, that's a new term for you.
I want to write that down. That's brilliant. A horticulturist.
But I got a call from the New York Times and asked me if I would comment on Nicholas Baker's new book, Vox, and which is a phone sex conversation between two people, one on the East Coast and West Coast. It's about a 3-hour phone sex conversation, and would I comment on it? Well, I hadn't read it, so I said I was too busy at the time, but I ran out and got it. And fabulous, hysterically funny, very erotic. It's a short read. In fact, I had a focus group with the women reading it and responding to the book, again, as a possible source of data. And here you see one of the few examples of a very creative use of phone sex talk on a phone conversation. Very creative. I highly recommend Murray Davis's book.
Do you think it would be better to buy it or listen to it?
Not Murray Davis. This was Nicholas Baker's book on Vox, VOX. I would savor the book. I would buy it, just kind of read it.
Just to have it. Yeah, I like to have them sometimes. Yeah.
The other thing that happens in film as well is that the couple climaxes at the exact same time.
Oh yeah.
Without fail.
Yeah, and we don't see a lot of foreplay.
No.
Yeah.
No, and it's usually a more gratuitous imagery of the woman. I think it's come a long way, no pun intended, than it had been in the past. But it usually in film, it was a means to end of showcasing a naked woman, and now I think it's more an equality of male and female. Generally, we don't have a lot of imagery of same sex, of course, but that is out there. But
yeah. But I think the climax still remains very male focused. Now, what was interesting in my work, and I can't believe I got paid to do this, was I decided to study porn films to see if that would be a source of sex talk. And I'm very fortunate that another scholar beat me to it, and a really noted journal, Semiotics. And he studied porn to look at film. And as we know, porn is highly formulaic, and usually moans and single syllable utterances and repetitive yes, not particularly interesting. But in this article in Semiotics, the author concluded that most of the utterances, I love this, were like a professor's comments in the margins of a student paper. Yes, keep going, penetrating. Oh, great, go deeper. I have to tell you that after reading this article, I became very self-conscious about my own margin notes.
You're never going to use the word penetrating when you grade somebody's papers.
No, absolutely not.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. But so we have a very restrained vocabulary. We have very few scripts that are out there that one could model anything out. And it's interesting, an analysis of soap operas found that sexual tease happens on average 7.4 times an hour, but there's no mention at all around contraceptions, STDs, safe sex, and virtually no sex talk. And it's very, very constrained. And then all we had was Nancy Reagan saying, just say no, basically, which is still the abstinence script that dominates a lot of sex education.
Which is unfortunate because we all know that it doesn't do what it in fact does, the opposite of what it thinks it's doing.
Well,
it's
it's
making
all
people have more sex because their curiosity is piqued. They're like, what is this thing that I'm not supposed to do? How exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it fuels the danger.
Oh,
Oh, we lost you.
Fuels the danger. Yeah. But
sorry, Mara, I just wanted to add, I've told Susan this on a past podcast, but I ask every female patient that I see if they're on birth control. And if they're not, I ask them if they want to be pregnant. And so many women nowadays, young and old, not on birth control, but don't want to be pregnant. And especially the young teens, I'm like, well, because they were only taught abstinence. Nobody ever talked to them about the final conclusion. It's almost like they don't put A to B to C.
There's also a weird guilt around STDs, and that people feel weird or guilty for saying, well, do you have an STD, or I have an STD, or whatever the conversation might lead to, which I've found fascinating, because if you are, the act of sex, it requires a level of, it doesn't really require a level of maturity. Anyone can do it, obviously, but there is a level of maturity to come together with this person and be like, okay, now we're going to have this act, and that my safety somehow goes out the window. It's such a weird psychological misstep in my opinion. And so many of my friends who have contracted sexually transmitted diseases all had pretty much the same answer when I asked, well, did you talk about this stuff beforehand? And they all said, no. Did you use a condom? No, I didn't want them to feel bad.
It makes my skin crawl.
It happens all the time.
Yeah, I used to give talks at the sororities on campus, and I sat around with a group of women and asked them, do they carry a condom when they go to a party and so forth? And they said, no. And we explored that. And they said, well, if they found a condom in their purse, if somebody else found it, it would make them look really slutty. So I posed to them, I said, so you're willing to risk STD and possibly death, for that matter,
or pregnancy, yeah,
because of what this says about you? And basically they said yes. So I don't think we can dismiss the stigma around this. I mean, Murray Davis wrote a superb book. In fact, I consider it the best book on sexuality ever. And he was denied tenure because of it at Berkeley. I mean, it's very sad, but he's a brilliant, brilliant theorist. And he wrote a book called Smut. And
I know this book.
Probably the title of the book didn't help his tenure portfolio. But anyway.
But it's Berkeley, for God's sakes.
But in fact, I was so moved by this book. I consider it really the best book ever written, because he tries to describe what happens between everyday reality and the slide into erotic reality, how time and space and objects and color, things shift. And it's just a brilliant analysis. In fact, I was so impressed with the book that I was able to meet him when I was in San Francisco, and we went out to lunch, and he actually helped shape my further research on play, because he wrote a great book on play and humor subsequently to that book. And but he writes in his book about prop failures that can happen, and condoms in a way are a prop failure. We have to realize that sexual contexts are very fragile. They're very well orchestrated. We're very sensitive to their settings, taking the mood, attention, our energy. And so, like if a record is skipping or there's a knock at the door, it throws the whole sexual reality into chaos. Condoms can do the same thing for people, are things that might protect them. And so we just have to be sensitive that that's one of the constraints. There's the linguistic constraints, there's the script constraints, there's the prop failure constraint. There's also the relational constraint. I mean, how is he going to see me? Am I a good girl, bad girl?
Right. When I was in my 20s, the condoms would be hidden somewhere in a little box under the bed just in case, but not out in the open. Now, as a grown woman, there in a, in a nice jar right by the bed out for God and everyone, because I think it sends two messages. One is I'm not scared to talk about this. And two, this shit's platinum and it's going to stay that way.
Yeah. Yeah. But the management, you've learned how to manage that, which is great. But I think for a lot of young people, that's still a big challenge. I wouldn't even say young people. I think for older people too. I don't think it.
Yeah, across the board. There's a lot of shame around it. I think you bring up a great point that even though it's mirrored in young people in the sorority, that anyone who thinks about sex or is possibly sexual or wears a tank top or doesn't go with the bra on, and notice it's very female focused. You don't hear of this talk very much around people with the male genitalia, but certainly women are vilified for being sexual beings.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So how are we supposed to feel comfortable as a teenager saying, please go get a condom, right?
Yeah, right.
Much less talk about it.
Much less talk about any of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I brought this up in another episode that my dear friend who has children, we were driving along, she's 13 at the time, we're driving along and I said, so do you have any boyfriends? Like what's going on? And because she was boy crazy. And she said, well, I like this one boy. I said, have you talked about, are you sexually active? What are you doing? And she said, well, I said, is it first base, second base? She's like, well, what's that? And I said, well, first base in my generation was kissing, second base, maybe a little bit up the shirt, third base, maybe, kind of down the pants, home run would have been sex. And she said, oh no, we have blowjobs now on first base. And I tried very hard not to react because I didn't want to have that moment with her where I was somehow deeming it inappropriate. I just thought, holy cow, kids have changed from when I was a kid. First base.
It's escalated quite a bit.
Yeah.
But I don't think
like Dr. Mara here is saying, people still don't talk about it. The sexual activity has moved faster, but nobody is talking about it still.
5-year-olds watch porn. I saw that research and my mind was blown.
Yeah. Yeah. And but a lot of this, the women giving blowjobs, it still usually favors the male. It's part of being accepted and it being, it's really needs to be examined. It's all about the empowerment issue, I think, ultimately. I think actually sex talk, now that I think about it, is all about empowerment. If you can't have a voice, how empowered can you be?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
How do you bring that conversation to young people when you go to talk to them, the birds and the bees, and you say, this is the story of sexuality? How do you encourage people to find that voice?
Well, one of the things I did was I did a film called Say Sex Talk, which starred David Schwimmer was in it. He was a student of drama in the theater department when I was at Northwestern. A lot of wonderful drama students were in it. They improvised all these scenes. Unfortunately, David, about a year ago, contacted me, asked me if I would remove it from YouTube. I just posted it out there. But it was 7 vignettes of improvised scenes because we don't have any scripts or scenes. And there were couples talking about safe sex before they were going to have sex. In fact, the CDC contacted me to use one of the scenes with, actually, ironically, with David Schwimmer. He wanted to do a scene saying no to the female because he said all my scenes were the female saying no to the male because, they didn't have a condom and so forth. And he said, you don't have any scenes of males. And I looked at the women who were there and we all looked and said, because it's never been our experience. But anyway, that was the scene that the CDC wanted to use in their training. So, I mean, I would say, we need to plug for more scripts in film, on television. We need to talk, we need to role play, we need to help students, young people develop scripts and so forth. I'm a big advocate for helping couples develop phone sex as a way of a prelude, if you will, an entree into the sex talk domain. I think finding a key metaphor that works for them, using play, humor, codes, nicknames, whatever it takes to help facilitate. Baby talk is a form, by the way, that I found in my research. Talk that suspends the rules and allows people to play. Okay. And I think having sex with no intercourse, no goal in mind, just playing and talking, and fantasy, as you mentioned, I think these are all possible ways we can go beyond just our elongating our vows.
Do you think that David had an issue with the video from the past because of the messaging around sex?
Well, I don't know. He was getting pissed off while we were filming because the men, it was all the women kind of in control. And he said, it's a very female, dominant. You don't have anything of males like taking control and saying, no, I don't want to have sex unless we have a condom. And
it makes a good point. I mean, I suppose that it is a rare occurrence, but it probably does happen out there in the world somewhere.
Well, ironically, I think those are the scripts we need. And that's why the CDC wanted it.
Yeah.
We need scripts of males, just like we need males at the forefront of the pro-choice movement. We never see them, but they're at the anti-choice movement. We need to see males more taking control of the script that ensures safe sex, that models sex talk instead of just playing chess,
Yeah, I agree. So look at him, way ahead of his time.
I think he was. Absolutely.
So cool.
So let me ask you a question. As therapists, how would you model sex talk to clients?
I don't do that as much with my clients because usually they're a bit older and coming to me for more like communication, relationship, sexuality issues. But with my patients, I do it a lot at the clinic. And so I've had a couple of young people be like, I don't even know how to bring this up with my boyfriend. And I explain to them, you're right. Let me think about it, how I say it to them. It's hard to think in the moment, but essentially have condoms, carry condoms is what I always tell them. It's okay to carry a condom. Anybody wants to have sex, you say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that without a condom. Also to have the pre-STD talks. And so before you're going to have sex, I encourage them to, even before you're in the bedroom, have you ever had a sexually transmitted infection? When was the last time you got tested? So I encourage young people to have those talks before sex, get used to the idea of condoms. And of course, I'm talking to them about birth control at the same time. That's probably about as deep as I get with patients at the clinic, because of course we have 15 minutes and who has more time than that? Mm-hmm. I have yet to experience, I would like to do more teenage clients because I think it's very important, especially to start young and understand. Like I pointed out, I'm not even great at it with my own partners. I do it, but I'm not great at it. And so I think the more we're taught that at a young age, the better we're going to do. We weren't taught any of this. And so we're still kind of floundering around trying to figure it out, right?
It's the great taboo.
I'm not a therapist, and I joke about the platinum thing, but I think when I do talk to people, adults included, not just young people, like my nieces or nephews or whatnot, or children of friends, is that a lot of times women are the collateral damage in sexual relationships. And I joke about the platinum thing because it's like, look at yourself as being worthy of saying, I'm taking my body, it's mine. I have dominion over it. It belongs to me and no one else. And I get to make those decisions. And also when it comes to sexually transmitted diseases, to know that many are asymptomatic. Many won't show, it's not like you'll just look and go, oh, that person has blah, blah, blah. That's not the reality. And so there is silent killers out there, or, and it may not kill you. It may just make you incredibly uncomfortable. It may affect the way you have children someday. It may give you cancer. There are STDs that lead to cancer. So I have those real world consequence kind of conversations. Not terrifying, but just like the fact of the matter is. And I think that when people hear things without fanfare, without the big pomp and circumstance, where it's just matter of fact, I think it makes sometimes those conversations easier and it gets heard a little better.
I agree with that. And that's my stance as a sexologist and as a medical provider, is just matter of fact. And I go back to what Dr. Mara keeps saying, it's about empowerment. We need to empower women to feel comfortable to say these things, and scripts do help. We did link to the bottom down below. There's an article called Yeah, 70 sex talk topics. It doesn't really go into the STD stuff as much, but it gives you 70 questions that you can talk to your partner about, and it's linked down below. So do you prefer to give or receive? Would you ever want to have group sex? What initially attracts you sexually to somebody? So it gives a whole list of 70 different things. I like this one. If I ever caught you masturbating, would you stop or would you finish? So it gives a whole bunch of scripted questions that people can go review. Again, the link's down below to hopefully start that communication. It needs to happen in the beginning of dating, in the very, very beginning. I've had a client tell me that she still fakes orgasms with her partner she's been married to for 10 years. So there's never, you can always go backwards too. It's called I forget, like pretend like you have amnesia and you're just starting over, and sit down together and just start over.
Away from the bed.
Away from the bedroom.
Conversation.
We talked about, sometimes it's okay to talk about fantasies in the bedroom, but when you're talking about sex, that should be done out of the bedroom. And so I think you're right. People need scripts. And so anybody who's listening who needs more help, there's sexologists out there, there's coaches, there's counselors, but also just go online, look at our link below, or find a script online that works for you and open the lines of communication with your partner.
Dr. Adelman, I'm curious, how did your self-awareness in sexuality change throughout the years as you were learning these different modes of discussion and different ways that people engage in sex and sexuality?
Personally, I found I wanted more. I wanted more discourse than the intercourse. You know, I wanted to talk more. I wanted to find, and I never really found that. You know, I never found really a partner who liked verbal play. And that's a really regret of mine, you know, because
whoa, we're never too old to find new partners. You might find your verbal partner next year, honey.
That's true, but I really love my single life, I have to admit. But I, you know, and I still keep looking for it in film. We certainly see more scenes, more sexuality on TV. It's like soft porn. You know, they're really kind of pandering to the general audience, people who wouldn't go out and see a porn film, but they could rent a film that's been rated highly and so forth. But we don't get a lot of the talk itself. In fact, I was really looking forward to that film, which I recently came online, Good Luck, Leo Grande, with the new Emma Thompson film on Hulu. But even in that film, there isn't it's very clinical. You know, the talk is about the sex. It's not really sex talk itself. I love the film. Don't get me wrong. I think it's a great film.
It was so good. Yeah.
But we don't really see or hear the actual sex, the arousing of erotic discourse. And yeah, that's unfortunate. I think the question that I find most fascinating and the course of my work is this: when does sex begin? I mean, I believe that talk is sex.
Talk is sex. So on our 2 weeks ago, we did fantasies, and I realized that Susan brings this up a lot. And I told her, I said, you bring this up a lot, and I think you should bring it up on every single episode we do. She's like, remember, people, sex does not start in the bedroom at the last minute at the end of the night. Sex starts in the daytime with talk and texting and flirting. And so this is a common theme that Susan reminds people of, which I super appreciate. So talk is very much foreplay, and it should start earlier on in the day than the sex piece. Yes.
And even activities that may not have anything to do with sex. You'd be surprised how far it will go just to be a balanced partner to someone. That's a very sexy thing.
Wait, explain balanced in
meaning that if your partner has several tasks a day, take a couple of the tasks for I think there's a rhetoric around parenting where it's like, oh, I have to babysit the kids. It's like, no, they're your children. You have to take care of your children. That's not just your wife's or your partner's job. Stuff like that. You know, look at each other as equal beings that, you know, and I think there's so many layers to it. For me personally, I just think I am so in my brain all the time that, like Dr. Adelman, I like conversation. And I think that certain, like doing the crossword puzzle together, that's hot,
Yeah,
so like
I
that, it's things like this. It could be as simple as just touching as you go by, or in the midst of a conversation with a group of people, you look at your partner and you just linger a little longer. Subtlety is a lost art in many ways.
That is true, but I go back to like my poor quiz results, wherever they are. You made a good point. I really focus in on and like the nonverbal cues and those pieces of it, because then I don't have to say it as much. I'm going to start practicing my sex talk, Dr. Mara. It's going to happen.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, what you were saying about in a split second, you can have an erotic moment with a partner. I mean, I always tell couples, and we've had this happen, like we're dating somebody, we're not that excited about them particularly, but suddenly they'll do something. You'll watch them, maybe the way they play with kids, the way they tell a joke, and in a split second, your whole assessment of that person has shifted, and they've moved from maybe Mr. Nerd to Mr. Wow, you are something else, right? I think those little micro dots can happen in the course of every day. And like you're saying, Susan, just looking at the table, and he or she will say something that's like, wow, that's impressive, and
Yeah.
that's an erotic moment, and those accumulate. They accumulate. And I think because we're so focused on the big climax and the big O and so forth, that we miss these little mini moments that build into erotic tension, where you really desire your partner and you want to be together, that happen in the course of the everyday, and I would also argue that those are moments too for sex talk, or a sexual compliment, or something that just conveys that feeling.
Yeah, consider letters A through N before you ever think about O.
I like that. What was the book again about the phone sex operators? I feel like if I read that, I'm going to be more likely to learn to be more verbal.
You mean Vox by Nicholson Barker?
Yeah, I'm going to read that, because I do think there's something about being able to be verbal, not only for sexuality purposes, but safe sex purposes, all of it. Yeah.
Yeah. But, as you were talking about, Mara, the importance for talking about safe sex, condom usage, and so forth. I mean, talk in and of itself is sex, and it's very arousing. And I think if couples could develop that within their relationship, they would increase tremendously their sexual gratification.
And how often they're having sex. So also, I would say that men probably also don't get as verbal as they could possibly learn to be. And I often hear from clients, my male clients, I want to be having more sexual activity, and I'm not. My female partner doesn't want to be having as much sex as I do. If they were more verbal, I'm betting those numbers would go up.
Yeah, finding the erotic in the more subtle approach. That funny scene again in Good Luck, Leo Grande, when she talks about having sex with her husband, it was a grunt, and then he rolls over. And it was absolutely, there was no talking, there was no subtlety at all in her umpteen decades with this husband, and it was quite sad. So, yeah, I think that what we have to realize ultimately is that talk, the symbolic, the linguistic world, is what makes us human. And it can constrain us and it can release us. I mean, it can provoke us, it can bore us, but it can also be silenced. And it can be so threatening, the talk itself, that we would even risk death. And so I think that we need to rejuvenate, we need to find the playfulness, the joy, the humor, the eroticism in the discourse of intercourse, and hopefully sustain healthy passions.
Amen.
Every time you say that it could even lead to death, I get goosebumps. The fact that even with HIV, that people still feel so uncomfortable talking about condoms does blow my mind. Yeah.
Yeah.
Blows my
So
mind.
hopefully they find a voice.
Yeah. Everybody should feel empowered, have a voice, speak their needs. We also link down below to a video. How to talk to your partner about sex, do's and don'ts, according to a sex therapist. And everybody can take the quiz down below to find out how well they score. Again, my scores were not great. So my comfort level with sexual communication was 12 out of 16. I thought I would be 16 out of 16, but I'm just not. I wish we would have had you take the quiz, Mara. Take the
I
quiz.
don't know how I'd score.
You would, I think you would score really well. And then my frequency of communicating about sexual things, 15 out of 23. So I'm surprised. I'm actually not surprised. I'm going to get more comfortable with all of the above.
Oh, good.
On a personal level, so I can teach others.
We have a success story already.
There you go. I took the test. I got 16 out of 16 for communication of sex, and I got 20 out of 23 for frequency of communication of sex. So, you know, there's still. I'm sure I'm annoying though. I'm like, let's talk about it. The other big thing that I'm an advocate of is self-pleasure, because before you can articulate that which brings you pleasure, you have to learn what that means for yourself. Mm-hmm. And so I'm a big believer in exploration of oneself, so that you then might be able to share that with others. For both male,
for every gender, for everybody, males.
Oh, 100% for everybody.
Know your own body so that you can then tell somebody else what it is that works for you, not always leading to the big O. Like, you know, like Mara said, Dr. Mara, I would love to like lay in bed and talk about sex all day and have mutual masturbation. There's so many other ways for people to have sexual activity, and the verbal part should be included. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. But you know, interestingly enough, I think masturbation is an incredibly taboo topic.
Oh,
incredibly taboo. Maybe even more taboo than sex itself. I mean, intercourse. Because it's just the idea of self-pleasuring is highly stigmatized, and like we're so partner focused, and I would like to certainly see that altered.
That's why I'm an advocate.
Yes, we did. Right. One of our. I'm forgetting the episode now, but we did an episode titled The Big O, and it was all about masturbation, and it was very fascinating too. That if you know that you've probably seen this more in all of your research, that male masturbation is not as stigmatized as female masturbation, because females are not supposed to have pleasure, and we're not supposed to be empowered to talk about things. And so it does really go back to that whole picture, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that she'd have pleasure without a male, unheard of.
Yeah. We're off to the island of Lesbos. Yeah.
I don't know. I can have much more multiple orgasms all by myself, and that is very hard for me to do with just a male penetrative partner. So there you go.
There you go. Dr. Adelman, tell people how they might find you if they need to reach out to you, or they want to ask you questions or follow your research.
Well, they can certainly Google me. There's a lot of my articles, they're mostly academic articles, are online. I have book chapters ad nauseum. They're welcome to email me, mara@seattleu.edu. Mara, M-A-R-A, @seattleu, add a U at the end of Seattle, edu for education. And I would, welcome any response.
And I've added a bunch of your links down below, and I hope you don't mind. I also going to add your art studio page, because that's your current work, and you're really good at all of these things, along with your Solitude course and your distraction workshop. I didn't get to go to those, but I would love to hear your distraction. Someday we should have you back to talk about how distraction gets in the way of sexual activity. Like you don't need to have your phone in the bedroom.
Absolutely.
Or a television, in my humble opinion. Are you in Seattle then, proper?
No, I live in Napa now.
Oh, you do? Okay, got it. Yeah, I grew up in Seattle, so.
Oh, yeah, it was great fun, but I live in Napa now. I'm retired. In fact, in preparation for today, I had to go back and reread stuff I'd written. I'd forgotten what I'd written about. I'm really grateful for you guys having me on and making this a topic. It's really important. Thank you.
we are honored to have you. When Mara told me that there was another Mara Adelman out there, I thought she was pulling my leg up for
It's been fun. We've
It's-
had a good time, Mara and I.
It's great. I love it. I love it.
I'm sad that we're further away now. So if you ever come this way and want to go to the ocean or something, you let me know. And I love both you ladies very much.
Love
Thank
you.
you.
Mwah. Thank you all. Thank you for watching and listening, everyone. Please check out links below and subscribe and share it with your friends and discover yourself and be proud of yourself and honor yourself and go out and have a ball. Pun intended.
Enjoy.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.